You're alone, aren't you? Sitting there, scrolling the world quiet, except for the hum of your screen. What if I told you the shadows in your room just moved ever so slightly when you weren't looking? Stick around, because these stories will crawl under your skin and stay there, whispering long after the lights go out. Let's dive into the darkness. The first time Sarah noticed the mirror in her new apartment, it was just off. She'd moved into the old building because it was cheap, a steal for a place with creaky wooden floors and tall, dusty windows. The mirror hung in the hallway, heavy and ornate, its frame carved with strange, twisting shapes that looked like faces if you stared too long. At night, when she passed it, she swore her reflection lagged just a fraction of a second behind her movements. She laughed it off at first, blaming the wine or her tired eyes. But then, one night she caught it. Her reflection smiled. She hadn't. She froze, heart pounding, staring into her own eyes that weren't hers anymore. The reflection tilted its head, raised a hand, and pressed it against the glass from the inside. Sarah stumbled back, her breath hitching. But when she blinked, it was just her again, pale, trembling, normal. She covered the mirror with a sheet that night, but by morning, the sheet was folded neatly at the foot of her bed. She never uncovered it again, but sometimes, in the quiet, she heard faint tapping from behind the glass, like something or someone wanted out. The woods behind Jacob's house were his playground as a kid, a maze of pines and moss where he'd build forts and chase imaginary monsters. But when he was 12, he found the clearing. It was perfectly circular, the ground bare except for a single, gnarled tree at its center. Its branches twisted like broken fingers. The air there felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. He didn't think much of it until he noticed the birds never sang near that spot. One day, curious, he carved his initials into the tree's bark. That night, his bedroom door creaked open. He thought it was his mom checking on him, but the shadow in the doorway was too tall, too thin, its limbs bending wrong. It didn't speak, just stood there, watching. The next morning, his initials were scratched into his headboard, deep and jagged. He never went back to the clearing, but sometimes, late at night, he'd hear footsteps circling his house, slow and deliberate, like something was pacing, waiting for him to step outside. The app was called Echo, and it promised to connect you with strangers for anonymous chats. Maya downloaded it on a whim, bored during a rainy weekend. At first, it was fun, random conversations with people across the globe, their voices distorted by the app's quirky filter. But then she matched with someone who didn't type. They just listened. She'd say hello, crack a joke, but the chat stayed silent, the little online dot glowing green. Annoyed, she closed the app, but her phone buzzed an hour later. A new message, "I see you." Her stomach dropped. She hadn't shared her name, her face, nothing. Another message, "Look behind you." She spun around, heart racing, but her apartment was empty. The messages kept coming, describing her clothes, her room, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. She deleted the app, smashed her phone, even moved to a new city. But every now and then, she'd get an email from an unknown sender with a single line, "Still watching." She stopped sleeping with the lights off when the old radio in Ethan's garage started picking up voices. He thought it was just interference. It was a relic, something his grandpa had tinkered with decades ago, its dials stiff and its speaker crackling. Late one night, while working on his car, Ethan heard it hum to life. A voice came through, soft and garbled, repeating his name. He froze, thinking it was a prank. But the voice grew clearer, reciting things he'd never told anyone, secrets from his childhood, mistakes he'd buried deep. He unplugged the radio, but the voice didn't stop. It followed him into the house, echoing from the walls, his phone, even the TV. "You can't hide," it whispered. Desperate, he smashed the radio to pieces, but the next night, it was back in the garage, fully assembled, playing his name on a loop. He doesn't go in there anymore, but he swears the voice is getting louder, closer, like it's inside his head now. The Polaroid camera was a thrift store find, $5 and still loaded with film. Chloe thought it was a steal, great for her photography hobby. The first picture she took was of her dog, Max, lounging on the couch. But when the photo developed, Max wasn't alone. A figure stood behind him, blurry and gray, its face featureless except for two dark hollows where eyes should be. Chloe laughed nervously, assuming it was a double exposure. She took another photo, this time of her kitchen. The figure was there again, closer, its head tilted toward the camera. She stopped using the camera, but the photos kept developing on their own, piling up on her desk. Each one showed the figure nearer, its hollow eyes sharper, until one night, she woke to the camera's flash going off in her bedroom. The photo that spat out showed her sleeping, the figure standing at the foot of her bed. She burned the camera in her backyard, but the smell of charred plastic still lingers in her house, and sometimes she feels those hollow eyes watching her sleep. The subway was always eerie at 3 a.m., but for Liam, it was the only way home after his bartending shift. One night, the train stopped between stations, lights flickering. A woman sat across from him, her face hidden under a hood. She hadn't been there a second ago. The air grew cold, and she started humming a low, tuneless sound that made his skin crawl. The train lurched forward, and she was gone. The next night, she was back, closer, her hood slipping to reveal a face that wasn't quite right, like it was melting. Each night, she appeared always nearer, always humming, until one night, the train stopped again, and she was right beside him. Her cold fingers brushed his arm, and she whispered his name. He quit his job, moved to a new city, but every now and then, he hears that humming, faint and distant, like she's still following him. The doll was a gift from Grandma, handmade with button eyes and a stitched smile. Emily, 7 years old, loved it at first, naming it Clara and carrying it everywhere. But then Clara started moving, not much, just a tilt of the head, or a shift in position, when Emily wasn't looking. Her parents thought she was imagining things, but one night, Emily woke to find Clara sitting on her chest, those button eyes glinting in the dark. She screamed, and her parents rushed in, but Clara was back on the shelf, still as ever. They locked the doll in a closet, but Emily could hear it scratching at the door at night, whispering her name in a voice that sounded too much like her own. They burned Clara in the fireplace, but the next morning, Emily found a new doll on her bed, identical except for one thing: its stitched smile was wider, sharper. like it knew something she didn't. The library was old, its shelves sagging under dusty tomes no one had touched in years. Alex, a college freshman, found a book bound in black leather, its pages blank except for a single sentence. "Write your name, and I'll tell you a story." Curious, he scribbled his name in pen. The next page filled with words, describing a day from his childhood in vivid detail, things he'd forgotten, things he'd never told anyone. Each night, he'd write his name, and the book would reveal more. But the stories grew darker, recounting secrets he'd buried, fears he'd never voiced. One night, the book wrote about his future, a car accident, a date, a time. Panicked, he tried to burn it, but the flames wouldn't touch it. Now, the book writes on its own, filling pages with his every move, and he swears the date of that accident is getting closer. The house on Maple Street had been empty for years, its windows boarded, its yard choked with weeds. When Kayla and her friends broke in on a dare, they found nothing but cobwebs and a single chair in the living room, facing a blank wall. They laughed, took selfies, but Kayla's phone glitched, showing a figure in the background of every shot, a tall, eyeless thing with too many arms. They ran, but that night, Kayla dreamed of the chair, and in the dream, she was sitting in it, unable to move, while the figure whispered her name. She woke to find her bedroom door open, the chair from the house sitting at the foot of her bed. Her friends won't talk about that night, but they all dream of the chair now, and sometimes, Kayla hears it creaking in the dark, like it's waiting for her to sit again. The voicemail was from an unknown number, left at 2:47 a.m. Rachel played it, expecting a wrong number, but it was just static, thick, crackling static with faint whispers buried in it. She deleted it, but another came the next night, louder, the whispers clearer, saying things like, "Under the bed," and "behind you." She changed her number, but the voicemails kept coming, always at 2:47 a.m., describing her house, her routine, her fears. One night, the static cleared, and her voice begged her to run. She checked every room, every closet, but found nothing. Still, she doesn't sleep anymore, because every night, the voicemails get longer, and the voice sounds more desperate, like it's running out of time. The attic was always locked, but Ben found the key under a floorboard in his new house. Curious, he climbed the narrow stairs and found a room filled with old portraits. Their eyes painted so vividly, they seemed to follow him. One portrait, larger than the rest, showed a woman with a sad, knowing smile. That night, he dreamed of her, standing at his bedside, whispering, "You shouldn't have come." The next day, the portrait was gone, but her face appeared in every mirror, every window, always watching. He boarded up the attic, but at night, he hears footsteps above, and sometimes, the mirrors reflect her standing right behind him, her smile no longer sad but hungry. The playground was abandoned, its swings rusted, its slide cracked. Maya's little brother Tim begged to play there, claiming he'd made a new friend. Maya thought it was harmless until Tim started coming home, with strange marks on his arms, tiny, crescent-shaped cuts, like fingernails. He said his friend, the boy with no face, gave them to him. Mia watched him one day, sitting alone on the swings, talking to the air. That night, she woke to Tim giggling in his room. She peeked in and saw him holding hands, with something invisible but heavy, denting the mattress where it sat. She grabbed Tim and ran, but the cuts still appear on his arms, and sometimes the swings outside her house move on their own, creaking in the dead of night. The diary was tucked behind a loose brick in the basement, its pages yellowed and brittle. Claire, renovating her new home, started reading it out of curiosity. It belonged to a girl named Lily, who wrote about hearing voices in the walls, voices that told her to do things. The entries grew frantic, describing a man with no mouth who watched her sleep. Claire thought it was just a creepy relic until she started hearing the voices too soft, insistent, coming from behind the walls. She tore the basement apart, found nothing, but the voices didn't stop. Last week, she woke to find a new entry in the diary, in her handwriting. "He's here." She doesn't remember writing it, but now the diary won't burn, and the voices are calling her name. The campsite was perfect, secluded, surrounded by towering pines, a lake glittering under the moon. Jake and his friends set up their tents, laughing, unaware of the old ranger's warning about staying out of the water after dark. That night, they heard splashing, like someone swimming, but no one was in the lake. The next night, the splashing was louder, closer, and one of the tents was soaked, as if something had climbed out of the water and pressed against it. On the third night, Jake saw a figure rising from the lake, its body slick and wrong, its eyes glowing like oil slicks. They packed up and fled, but Jake swears he still hears splashing outside his window at night, no matter how far from water he is. The clock in the antique shop was beautiful, its hands frozen at 11:11. The shopkeeper warned Emma not to wind it, but she couldn't resist. At home, she turned the key, and the clock ticked to life. That night, at 11:11, her house went silent. No hum of appliances, no distant traffic, just the clock's ticking. Shadows moved in her peripheral vision, shapes that vanished when she turned. The next night, at 11:11, the shadows stayed, forming figures that whispered her name. She smashed the clock, but every night, at 11:11, the ticking returns, and the shadows get closer. Last night, one touched her, its fingers cold as ice, and now she's afraid to sleep, knowing 11:11 is coming again.